The patrolman who spat on him had been on the force for 7 years. He had 3 excessive force complaints buried in a filing cabinet that no one with real authority had ever bothered to open. He had a union representative who picked up before the second ring. He had a lieutenant who had spent 5 years making his problems disappear the way smoke disappears on a windy afternoon. Clean, quiet, and without a trace. He had spent every one of those 7 years operating on one single assumption: that the badge on his chest made him the most dangerous thing in any room he walked into. He was right about almost everything. He had no idea that the man he was about to spit on, the quiet, older black man in the worn Morehouse College hoodie sitting on the bench near window 5, was going to be sitting behind the chief's desk of his own department in 4 days. Stay with this, because what happens in the next hour is not just the end of a career. It is the beginning of a reckoning that will dismantle an entire culture of unchecked arrogance from the inside out. Brick by brick, file by file. And it starts with a Thursday morning that was supposed to be nobody's business but his own. Jerome Elias Washington was 57 years old, and he had not set an alarm. In the full context of his life, this was nearly a revolutionary act. For 29 years with the Atlanta Police Department, from his first patrol shift in the 4th District, through 12 years of detective work, through commanding a major crimes unit, through his eventual appointment as deputy superintendent, the alarm had been the first word of every single morning. A summons, non-negotiable, the world pulling him forward before he was ready. Disabling it the night before had required a deliberate, quiet act of will. The kind of small acts that are sometimes necessary to override habits carved so deep they feel like bone. He woke naturally at 6:52, lay still for a few minutes, listened to the city outside his window the way you can only listen when you are not already moving toward the next obligation. The sky was doing that particular thing it does in the half hour before sunrise. That gray purple that belongs to no other time of day. That uncertain light that looks like the world deciding whether to continue. He had seen this light 10,000 times from the other side of a windshield driving toward crime scenes and depositions and briefings that began before the precinct coffee finished brewing. Watching it now from a horizontal position from the warmth of his own bed in a city he was still learning the rhythms of, felt like a form of wealth he had not previously known he was missing. He was 57 years old. He had retired from Atlanta 8 months ago. Not because he was finished, which he was not, but because a specific chapter of his work had reached its natural end, and because a different kind of work had found him before he fully understood what rest felt like. Mayor Diane Cartwright of Caldwell Falls had called him directly, through channels that bypassed the normal political machinery, because she did not trust the normal political machinery to produce the chief she actually needed. She needed someone who had spent a career studying how police departments fail. Someone who knew from the inside how misconduct is concealed. Who had enough distance from Caldwell Falls' existing culture to cut through it without flinching. And who was, in her exact words during their second phone call, too old to care about being liked and too experienced to be played. He had accepted after 48 hours of consideration and one very honest conversation with himself. His official start date was Monday, 4 days from now. Today was his. He dressed without ceremony. Dark jeans, worn soft from years of use. A Morehouse College hoodie he had bought at his nephew's graduation 9 years ago, worn so many times the cuffs had frayed to a comfortable softness that no new garment could replicate. Work boots scuffed at the toes. He looked at himself in the hallway mirror and saw what anyone would see. An older black man in comfortable lived-in clothes, unremarkable, going about his morning. He saw the absence of the uniform, the absence of the badge, the version of himself that existed when no one was watching who he professionally was. He had one errand. His younger brother Calvin had died 16 months ago, a cardiac arrest at 53. Sudden, without warning, without giving Jerome any time to prepare for a world that did not have Calvin in it. Calvin had lived in Caldwell Falls for the last 14 years of his life. He had worked as a school maintenance supervisor at Garrison Elementary on the east side of town. He had coached Little League on Sycamore Avenue every Saturday morning from April through July. He had been the kind of man who remembered everyone's name, who showed up when called, who laughed with his whole body. 6 weeks before he died, Calvin's pickup truck had been impounded over an expired registration tag. A small administrative thing, the kind of thing that gets handled and forgotten. Only Calvin never got the chance to handle it. Inside the truck was a cardboard box, tools he used for side work on weekends. His coaching clipboard still covered in his handwriting play diagrams and player names. A worn Bible he had kept on the passenger seat for the last 11 years. And a framed photograph. The two brothers at Jerome's retirement ceremony in Atlanta. Calvin, in a blazer, grinning so wide it looked like his face might not contain it. Jerome, beside him, hand on his shoulder. That box had sat in the Caldwell Falls Police Department property storage for 16 months. Through the grief and the estate complications and the simple, overwhelming weight of losing someone without preparation, Jerome had finally secured court authorization to collect the contents. The paperwork was in a sealed envelope in his jacket pocket. He had the address memorized. He would go collect Calvin's things and be home before noon. He drank his coffee at the kitchen table and watched the street come alive. A woman walked a dog. A garbage truck made its slow rounds. An ordinary Thursday proceeding with complete indifference to the fact that in 4 days, Jerome Elias Washington would walk into a building and assume command of an entire police department. He appreciated the indifference. He finished his coffee, picked up his keys, and locked the front door behind him. He did not know as he walked to his truck in the cold morning air what the next hour was actually going to cost him. The Caldwell Falls Police Department occupied a corner building on Meridian Avenue, constructed in the early 1970s, and renovated twice since neither renovation having done enough to erase the original structure's institutional heaviness. The exterior was brick and poured concrete. Imposing and tired at the same time, the way government buildings look when they have been asked to serve more functions than they were ever designed for. The American flag above the entrance hung stiff in the cold morning air. The steel letters of the department's name were fixed to the facade, several of them slightly misaligned in a way that had long since stopped being noticed by anyone who worked there. Jerome parked in the visitor lot at 8:43 and sat for a moment before getting out. He had been to this building twice before. Once for a walk-through. Once for a brief meeting with the outgoing chief, a man named Farwell, who had communicated through polite words and unmistakable body language that he believed the department was fundamentally sound and would benefit primarily from being left alone. Jerome had drawn his own conclusions from that meeting and from the 39 pages of departmental review that preceded it. He had kept those conclusions to himself. He was not here in any official capacity today. Mayor Cartwright's office had offered an escort. He had declined. He wanted to see the building the way a civilian saw it. From the front. Alone. Without warning. He told himself this was professional instinct. Mostly, it was simpler than that. He was here for Calvin's things. That was the whole of it. The lobby of the Caldwell Falls Police Department communicated everything essential about an institution within the first 30 seconds of entry. The ceilings were low. The lighting was fluorescent and too yellow. The floor was linoleum scrubbed so many times the original pattern had faded to a ghost of itself in the high-traffic paths from the door to the service windows. A long service desk ran the length of the far wall divided into 5 numbered windows. A row of plastic chairs, the kind bolted together in groups of 3, formed a waiting area, already 2/3 full at 8:45. The bulletin board near the entrance held flyers in varying states of age. A missing persons notice from 14 months ago. A community meeting announcement from the fall. A laminated sheet listing lobby hours that someone had taped crookedly and no one had straightened. The American flag on the counter behind window 1 was tilted, slightly knocked at some point, and replaced without being straightened. The people in the lobby were the particular cross-section that police station lobbies always hold. A retired schoolteacher with a spiral notepad and reading glasses on a chain around her neck. 2 men in construction clothes, probably there about a toe. A young mother with a toddler on her lap who had the exhausted expression of someone who had been waiting long and expected to wait longer. A teenager in the corner, earbuds and eyes moving slowly around the room, the way teenagers in public places move their eyes when they are pretending not to pay attention. Everyone processing their own piece of ordinary hardship. Everyone patient in the specific way of people who have no alternative. Jerome found the waiting bench near window 5. Property and evidence retrieval, marked by a small placard mounted directly on the wall above it. Window 5's light was off, the clerk not yet at their post. He sat down, rested his forearms on his knees, and settled into the patient stillness that nearly 3 decades of police work had built into his constitution. He had learned very early in his career that the ability to wait without agitation was one of the most practically useful qualities a person could possess. He watched the room the way he always watched rooms, without appearing to. He watched how the staff at the active windows handled the people in front of them. Some efficiently and with reasonable courtesy. Some with the flat impatience of people who had been performing the same tasks for too long and had stopped seeing the individuals before them as individuals. He watched who was given the benefit of the doubt and who was not. How long each transaction took. Whether the length appeared to correlate with the complexity of the business being conducted or with something else. Something less easily named. He had been sitting approximately 7 minutes when he became aware of Officer Derek Holt. Holt was 35 years old and wide through the shoulders with the build of a man who directed considerable personal energy into the gym and directed that same energy into his work in ways that were not always appropriate. His buzz cut was precisely maintained. His uniform was immaculate in the way that reveals personal investment. Every crease sharp, every button perfectly aligned. His boots polished to a reflective shine. He carried a large, insulated coffee thermos in his left hand with casual possessiveness, the way some men carry something they consider an extension of themselves. He had a habit, Jerome noted immediately, of cracking the knuckles of his right hand against his left palm. Not nervously, rhythmically, like a man tapping out a pattern only he could hear. Holt moved through the lobby the way a man moves through space he considers his territory. His gaze moved over the room in a continuous low sweep, neither warm nor curious. Proprietary. The specific surveillance of someone cataloging potential problems. When his eyes landed on Jerome sitting quietly on the bench near window 5, older black man in a worn hoodie and work boots, they paused. Jerome met the look without expression and without looking away. He completed his assessment of Holt in approximately 2 seconds and registered the result without allowing it to reach his face. He had 57 years of practice at this particular calculation. Holt looked away first. He continued his circuit of the lobby, stopped at the service counter to exchange a word with the officer at window 2 in a tone too low to carry, then turned and stood near the entrance with his thermos and his rhythmic knuckle-cracking, watching the room. 3 minutes later, he started walking toward Jerome. Jerome watched him come and thought about Calvin. He thought about the box of Calvin's things sitting in a storage locker somewhere in this building. The small accumulated physical remnants of a man's daily life waiting in the dark. He thought about what Calvin would have said about this particular moment, because Calvin had always been the one between them who could find the humor inside indignity, who had a gift for deflating tension with a single well-placed, perfectly timed observation. Jerome would have given something significant for his brother's company right now. Holt stopped in front of him. He cracked his knuckles once. Jerome looked up unhurried. No greeting. No identification. No acknowledgement that the person being addressed had a reason for being in a public building on a Thursday morning. Just a flat declaration. You need to clear this area. Jerome did not move. He said, in the naturally deep voice that had spent 3 decades learning to carry authority without raising its volume, I am waiting for the property clerk at window 5. I have business there. Something shifted in Holt's face. A slight tightening at the jaw, a fractional narrowing behind the eyes. The specific expression of a man who is accustomed to having his first statement end the conversation and who has just encountered a different kind of response. This area is part of the service queue. No number, no seat. This was not accurate. The bench Jerome occupied was designated by the placard directly above his head as a waiting area specifically for property storage and evidence retrieval, a function entirely separate from the general service queue. Jerome had read the placard when he sat down, because Jerome Washington read signs. He gestured toward the placard with a slight inclination of his head. Property storage waiting area. Window 5 opens at 9. I am early. Holt glanced at the placard. Briefly enough that whether he actually read it was impossible to say. He looked back at Jerome. Whatever the sign said, it had not altered his position. You wait over there. He pointed toward the general waiting area near the entrance. Move. Jerome looked at the general waiting area. He looked at Officer Holt. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and produced the sealed envelope. The physical, documented evidence of legitimate business to conduct at this specific window. He held it up simply, not as a weapon, not as a demonstration, as the most straightforward possible evidence of his purpose. I have an authorization letter for property retrieval. I have the reference number. The window opens at 9. He checked his watch. It is 8:51. I will wait here. He placed the envelope on his knee and settled back against the bench with the particular stillness of a man who has made a decision and does not intend to revisit it. Something hardened in Holt's face. He had come over here expecting a certain kind of interaction, and he was encountering a different kind, and the difference itself was registering as a challenge to something he considered essential about the natural order of things in this lobby. He cracked his knuckles against his palm twice. Then he leaned forward, reducing the physical distance between himself and Jerome in a way that was calculated to communicate something about power and about space. People like you, Holt said, and the phrase arrived with the specific weight of something being deployed rather than simply spoken. Always think you've got a reason to be wherever you are. He let it hang in the air for a beat. Move to the other area, or I am going to have to ask you to step outside. Jerome looked at him steadily. If you have a concern about my presence here, I would ask you to bring your supervisor over. I will explain my business to them." Holt's jaw tightened. The request for a supervisor meant documentation. It meant another person whose account of this interaction would exist somewhere. It meant a witness. He reached for his shoulder radio. "This is Holt in the lobby. I need Sergeant Crane up front." The response crackled back within 30 seconds. While they waited, the lobby continued around them. The queue moved. A phone rang at the service counter. The toddler near the front asked his mother when they were going home. Jerome was aware of the people in the waiting area turning their attention toward this exchange with the peripheral attentiveness that public confrontations command even from people who are trying to mind their own business. He was also aware with professional precision that this was a moment with a specific trajectory that Holt had set in motion and apparently had no intention of stepping off. Sergeant Patty Crane arrived from a side hallway 2 minutes later. She was in her mid-40s, short hair, the efficient air of someone who had managed too many of these situations to give any of them more energy than absolutely necessary. She got Holt's version in about 30 seconds, nodded, turned to Jerome with the flat expression of a person executing a decision that was already made before she arrived. "Sir, the officer has discretion over lobby usage. If he has asked you to move, I would ask you to cooperate." Jerome waited a beat. Then he said quietly, "The placard directly above my head designates this bench as the property retrieval waiting area. I have a sealed authorization letter for a property retrieval. Window 5 opens at 9. It is now 8:54. Crane glanced at the placard. A brief glance. Then she looked back at Jerome. She did not say anything about the placard. She said, "Officer Holt is asking you to move as a matter of lobby management." Jerome looked at Crane for a moment. Then he said, "I would like that request documented, please. In writing, with your name and badge number." The retired schoolteacher near the door had stopped pretending to look at her notepad. The teenager in the corner had his phone angled in a way that was no longer casual. What happened next took 11 seconds. Holt told Jerome he was creating a disturbance and reached down, grabbed his arm, and pulled. The grip was not a suggestion. It was designed to move a person whether they cooperated or not. Jerome did not resist. He went still in the specific way of a man who has made a deliberate choice because he understood with the precise understanding of someone who had spent a career on the other side of these moments what the geometry of a black man resisting in a police lobby looks like and what it costs. Compliance in the moment is not acceptance. It is survival. It is the preservation of the ability to address something correctly afterward. The grip tightened. Jerome felt the pressure against the tendons of his wrist. The lobby had gone very quiet. The two construction workers had stopped talking entirely. The young mother had pulled her toddler closer and was no longer looking at her phone. The retired schoolteacher had stood up from her plastic chair. The teenager's phone was now fully raised, recording openly without apology. Holt announced in a loud, flat voice that Jerome was being detained for failure to comply and disorderly conduct. He called for transport. Jerome spoke once, calmly, to Holt's shoulder radio number which he had read from 6 feet away. He stated it aloud. He said, "I will remember that number." Holt let out a short, contemptuous laugh. "Sure you will." He began moving Jerome toward the lobby exit. The sealed envelope slipped from Jerome's grip in the movement. It fell to the floor. Jerome stopped walking and looked down at it. Holt kicked it aside. A single casual motion, not accidental. Jerome said quietly, "That is legal documentation. I need that returned." Holt shoved him forward. Jerome's right shoulder caught the edge of the door frame. He absorbed the impact without showing it. The lobby was completely silent now. No shuffling papers, no murmured conversations, No child's voice asking about going home. Just the sound of footsteps on linoleum and the hum of fluorescent lights. The retired schoolteacher had her notepad open. She was writing. The teenager's phone had not moved. Holt leaned in from behind, close to Jerome's ear. He said something low, something that the camera 3 feet away would pick up with startling clarity once the audio was processed. And then he spat, deliberate, contemptuous, directly onto the back of Jerome's hoodie. Above the Morehouse logo, Jerome did not turn around. He took one slow breath. He looked forward, and his face held an expression that the teenager's phone captured in full, an expression that would later defeat every attempt at a caption, because what was on Jerome's face was not anger, not humiliation, not shock. It was the specific stillness of a man who has just been handed exactly what he needed, and who knows it, and who is not going to say so. Not yet. They put him in the back of a transport vehicle. Handcuffs, too tight, already biting into the skin of his wrists. Officer Ray Sutter, 22 months on the force, was in the passenger seat. He had been in the lobby during the confrontation. He had said nothing throughout. His silence was its own category of information, and Jerome had noted it. The bay door rolled down behind the vehicle. The engine turned over. The car pulled out of the lot and onto Cross Street. Through the partition, Holt performed. He talked at Jerome the way men talk at someone restrained and unable to effectively respond. The specific dynamic of performed authority over a captive audience. Lot of nerve. Hanging around a police station acting like you own the place. Always got something to say. Always got to make everything complicated. Jerome watched the building recede through the rear window. He thought about Calvin. He thought about Calvin's laugh. The loudest, most completely unself-conscious laugh he had ever encountered on another human being. The kind of laugh that made people start laughing before they even knew what the joke was. He thought about the box of Calvin's things in the storage locker. Still in that building. Still waiting. He directed his attention inward, and he began to catalog. It was not a conscious decision. It was simply what his mind did automatically in situations that required documentation. 1. False arrest without probable cause. 2. Excessive force resulting in physical injury. The wrists. The shoulder impact against the door frame. 3. Racially charged language. People like you. Delivered with the specific deliberateness of a deployed weapon. 4. Failure to honor explicit requests for a supervisor to document the interaction. 5. Deliberate biological contact. An act of intentional degradation committed against a person in custody, which had a legal classification that the person who committed it had apparently not paused to consider. Jerome thought about that for a moment. The legal classification. He knew exactly what it was. Through the partition, he heard Holt still talking. He let 30 seconds pass. Then he said, through the partition without raising his voice, "What is your employee number, Officer Holt?" A short, contemptuous laugh from the front. "Write it off the badge when you are processed." "I would like you to state it verbally," Jerome said. "For my own record." "You do not have a record. You are in custody." "I have a memory," Jerome said. A brief silence. Then, from the front seat, "You know what, I have dealt with 100 guys like you. All attitude, no sense. Let us see how much you have to say sitting in a holding cell." Jerome looked at the passing street through the window. He noted the route. He noted the time, 9:08 confirmed on a bank sign visible through the rear glass. He noted the cruiser's identification number on the interior frame. He noted the radio codes Holt was using to communicate with dispatch. He noted Sutter's silence in the passenger seat. The silence of a young man who had witnessed something and had not yet decided what to do with it. That silence was its own form of data. He looked at the back of Sutter's head for a moment. Then he said quietly, in the flat, factual tone of a man making a simple observation, "I would remember this drive, Officer Holt, if I were you." Holt did not respond. Sutter did not respond. The car arrived at the rear bay 7 minutes later. Jerome had the route memorized, the time logged, the badge number fixed in his mind, and the names of 2 witnesses from the lobby who had made the specific kind of eye contact that communicates solidarity and the intention to remember. He had everything he needed. The bay door rolled down behind them. The engine cut. And Jerome sat in the hard plastic seat in the handcuffs and the hoodie that now had a man's spit drying on the back of it, and he was entirely still. And he was already thinking about Monday morning. The booking area was on the ground floor through heavy steel doors from the rear vehicle bay. It was rectangular, fluorescent, windowless. The kind of room where everything looks slightly more stark than it would anywhere else where the lighting is bright enough to compensate for the absence of natural windows in a way that creates not warmth, but clinical flatness. A row of holding cells occupied the far wall behind reinforced steel mesh. An elevated booking desk dominated the near end, presiding over the room the way these desks are designed to preside. From above. Looking down, at the booking desk sat Sergeant Norma Dade. Norma Dade had been with the Caldwell Falls Police Department for 20 years. She had started on patrol, moved to administrative and booking roles after a knee injury in her 8th year, and had maintained across the full span of her tenure a paperwork error rate of essentially 0. She considered this her most important professional credential. She was 52 years old with close-cropped silver hair and reading glasses on a chain around her neck that she lifted to her face only when absolutely necessary, which she treated as a matter of personal principle. She was currently working a crossword puzzle which she folded without urgency to the back page when she heard the bay doors open. Holt came through with Jerome. He had the air of a man presenting something he had retrieved from a minor inconvenience. Got a non-compliant from the lobby. Failure to comply. Disorderly conduct. Run him for priors and let us get this moving. Norma looked at Jerome. She did this in the evaluating way of a person for whom every intake was functionally identical until the paperwork proved otherwise. She noted the Morehouse College hoodie. She noted the handcuffs applied too tight. She noted the sealed envelope now carried in Holt's left hand held loose and unceremoniously. She noted that confiscated property should have been bagged and tagged before entering the booking area. 3 procedural violations before she had picked up her pen. She reached for her intake form. "All right," she said. "Let us get a name." "Sir, would you please turn and face me?" Jerome turned. The fluorescent light of the booking area hit his face directly. Full, unobstructed, designed to see everything clearly. Norma Dade looked at his face. She reached for her reading glasses and put them on. She looked at his face again. Her pen stopped. It was approximately 2 inches above the form. Suspended, motionless. Her expression underwent a series of changes that happened in such rapid succession they were almost simultaneous. First, the widening of the eyes that happens when the brain receives information that contradicts its expectations. Then, the rapid internal process of reconciling what the eyes are showing with where the eyes are showing it and under what circumstances. Then, something with a specific gravity to it. The gravity of a person who has just understood the full dimensions of a situation rather than only its surface. She had seen this face before, not casually, not in passing. She had seen it in the specific context of official administrative business that makes a face important and memorable. 10 days ago, in the course of her normal duties, she had processed a routing memo from the mayor's office. One of hundreds of documents that crossed her desk in any given month, all of which she read because Norma Dade read everything. The memo had contained in the section labeled Appointment Summary a name and a formal headshot photograph. The photograph had been a good likeness. She was looking at that face right now. In her booking area, in handcuffs, the pen slipped from her fingers. It hit the elevated desk with a sharp, small crack that in the quiet of the booking area was startlingly loud. It rolled to the edge. It dropped to the floor behind the counter with a second softer sound. Norma did not move to retrieve it. She was very still. Jerome Elias Washington, she whispered. The name came out like a prayer and a confession pressed together into a single breath. Like a woman confirming a disaster she has been hoping to be wrong about, and has just confirmed she is not. Holt, leaning against the far wall finishing his coffee, turned at the sound of the dropped pen. He frowned. He had not caught the whisper. "What is the holdup, Norma? Run him for priors." Norma did not look at Holt. She looked at Jerome. She looked at him with the expression of a person holding something large and fragile and understanding she cannot hold it alone. "Officer Holt," she said. Her voice had stripped itself to its essential frequency. Not raised, not hysterical, but carrying the specific quality of urgency that strips away all professional decoration and communicates its meaning directly. "Come here. Come here right now." Holt walked over with the mild irritation of a man being interrupted during a task he considers already complete. He looked at the intake screen Norma had pulled up before he arrived. The department's integrated personnel and command directory, which included not just current staff, but all authorized individuals with active clearances and incoming appointments. She had typed the name. The screen had populated. He read it. His eyes moved across the profile from left to right. They reached the photograph. The formal headshot against a plain background. And they stopped. He looked at the photograph. He looked at Jerome, standing 3 feet away in the handcuffs. He looked at the photograph again. He read the title beneath it. He read the effective date. He read it twice. The smirk that had been a permanent habitual feature of his face, as much a part of his face as his bone structure, did not fade gradually. It was there, and then it was gone, as completely and instantaneously as a light switched off. What replaced it was not fear, not anger, not any single identifiable emotion. It was the total absence of them, a blank, stricken quality. The specific expression of a person whose operating system has received input it cannot process and has not yet loaded a response. The screen read, Jerome Elias Washington, Deputy Superintendent Retired, Atlanta Police Department. Appointed Chief of Police, Caldwell Falls Police Department. Effective Monday. 2 officers working at desks across the room had been watching since Norma stood up. They read the screen from where they were. One made a short, involuntary sound. The other went completely still. A stillness of a different quality than inattention. Jerome stood in the center of the room, in the handcuffs, in the Morehouse hoodie with a man's spit drying on the back of it, wrists already reddening toward a bruise. And he was quiet. He was not performing composure. He simply possessed it. The way he had possessed it in the lobby and in the transport vehicle, and on every morning of a career built on the ability to be the most patient person in any given situation. He looked at Holt with an expression that contained no triumph, no vindication, nothing that could be named as satisfaction. It contained instead the completion of a calculation. The specific expression of a man who has correctly anticipated every step of a process and is now watching the final step execute exactly as predicted. Holt's right hand moved, the habitual tick activating before he was aware of it. Knuckles finding palm. the familiar rhythm, and then he realized what he was doing and stopped. He forced his hands to his sides. He stood with them there motionless, and the stillness of his hands was its own precise announcement about what was happening inside him. 3 seconds, 4, 5. The booking area was entirely silent. The fluorescent lights hummed. Somewhere in the building a phone rang unanswered. Then Holt opened his mouth. The first sound that came out was not words, but the specific sound of a man searching for a version of reality in which he is not ruined. "Sarge," he said. His voice was a full octave higher than its normal register. "Sarge, and then he stopped, and then he tried again. She said he was concealing merchandise," she said. "Officer Holt." Norma's voice came down on his like a door closing. "Stop talking." She was already around the booking desk, moving toward Jerome with her keys in her hand, moving with the purposeful pace of someone executing damage control. Not running, but moving with the specific urgency of a person for whom every additional second is an additional second of institutional catastrophe. She reached Jerome. She looked up at him with the expression of a person who is beneath the professional surface genuinely horrified, and who is also a 20-year professional, and who is therefore managing both of these things simultaneously. "I am so sorry," she said, and those 4 words carried in them more sincerity than most people manage in a paragraph. "I am removing the restraints right now." She found the key. Her hands were steady. Norma Dade had been processing difficult intakes for 20 years, and her hands had learned to stay steady when the rest of her was not. She inserted the key. The cuffs opened. She caught them before they fell and held them at her side. Jerome brought his arms forward slowly. He looked at his wrists. The red indentations pressed into the skin, the marks already settling toward the bruise. He looked at them with the same clinical attention with which he had looked at everything else this morning. Assessing, filing, making the record complete. Then he looked at Holt. Holt was standing at the terminal, backed slightly against the wall, and he looked like a man who has discovered too late the nature of the thing he has been standing on. His face had gone from blank to a grayish pallor that had nothing to do with the fluorescent lighting. His mouth was opening and closing in the specific way of a person cycling through possible statements and finding none of them survivable. His eyes moved from Jerome to the screen, to Norma, to Jerome again, searching for an ally, an exit, a version of events that closed differently than the one currently unfolding. He found none of these things. He cracked his knuckles once involuntarily, then stopped himself. And the stopping of himself communicated everything that needed to be communicated about his state. Lieutenant Gary Moss arrived 4 minutes later. He was Holt's direct superior. He was also the man who had cleared Holt's 3 prior excessive force complaints through internal affairs for the past 5 years, with documentation methods that were depending on your perspective, either careful procedural management or deliberate obstruction. He walked in expecting a routine intake problem, possibly a difficult civilian, possibly a paperwork complication. He stopped when he saw the screen. He read it. He looked at Jerome. He looked at the spit on the hoodie. He looked at the red marks on Jerome's wrists. He looked at the expression of quiet, absolute authority on the face of the man who was going to be his commanding officer in 4 days. He looked like a man who has just realized that the building he has been standing in is not the building he thought it was. Jerome addressed him by full name and rank. Lieutenant Moss. Precise. Measured. Demonstrating without elaboration that he already knew the chain of command, that he had reviewed the organizational structure before his first official day, that there was no element of this department he had not already begun to understand. "My name is Jerome Elias Washington. I have been unlawfully detained, physically assaulted, and subjected to a deliberate act of degradation by Officer Holt in the lobby of this building in front of multiple civilian witnesses and on multiple active recordings. He spoke without notes, without a raised voice, with the measured cadence of a man who has given authoritative direction for 3 decades, and whose voice carries the organic authority of someone who has never needed volume to be heard. I require 3 things to happen in the next 5 minutes. Moss blinked. First, all surveillance footage from the lobby, the transport bay, and this booking area from 7:15 this morning forward is to be secured immediately to an isolated server. No access except to persons I personally designate. If one frame of that footage is missing, corrupted, or modified, I will file a federal obstruction referral personally, and I will file it against you. Moss's mouth opened slightly. Second, Officer Holt's body camera and the dash cam from the transport vehicle are to be surrendered to Sergeant Dade within the next 4 minutes. He looked at Holt when he said this. Holt did not look up. Third, the sealed authorization letter confiscated from me during my unlawful arrest is to be returned to me immediately. A pause. Then, Moss said with the last available reach toward some form of control, "Chief Mr. Washington, let me make this right. Let us handle this internally. Let me make some calls and say, we are done talking." 4 words. They arrived with the specific finality of a door closing on a hallway. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with the complete elimination of the space that had existed before they were spoken. Moss turned to Holt. "Give me your camera." Holt unclipped his body camera from his chest with hands that were not fully steady. He set it on the booking desk. The sealed envelope was retrieved from the confiscated property bin. Jerome opened it. He removed the official appointment letter. The letter bearing Mayor Diane Cartwright's signature. The letter that had been in his jacket pocket through the entire lobby confrontation, through the transport vehicle, through the booking intake. He placed it flat on the booking desk, face up, in the full light of the room, where every person present could read it. He did not gesture at it. He did not make a production of placing it there. He simply set it down and left it in plain sight. And it said everything a letter of that kind says when it is allowed to speak for itself. Then he looked at Norma Dade. "Thank you, Sergeant," he said. "You handled a very difficult situation with integrity." Norma Dade, 20-year veteran, near zero paperwork error rate. Absolute professional composure, looked at him and nodded once. Then she looked very carefully at the ceiling for a moment. It was the only sign she allowed herself of the weight she was carrying. Jerome took out his phone and made one call. It was 9:21 in the morning. He had been in the building for 38 minutes. Then he picked up his sealed authorization paperwork from the desk, walked across the booking room, out through the steel doors, back through the lobby, and directly to window 5, which was now open. Clerk at post, 9:23. He completed the errand he came to do. He signed for the box of Calvin's belongings. The coaching clipboard still covered in Calvin's handwriting. Play diagrams and player names in blue ink. The worn Bible, its spine soft from years of daily handling. The tools wrapped in a shop rag. And at the top of the box, face down, the framed photograph. He lifted it carefully, turned it over. The 2 of them at Jerome's retirement ceremony. Calvin in a blazer, grinning so wide it looked like his face might not contain the joy. Jerome beside him, hand on his shoulder. Jerome held the photograph for a moment. He did not say anything. He did not need to. He set it carefully on top of the box, tucked the box under his arm, walked through the lobby, through the front doors, into the cold morning air. He did not look back. The video was 47 seconds long. 3 separate phones had captured the lobby confrontation from 3 different angles. The clearest recording came from Beverly Odom, the retired schoolteacher who had been sitting near the door with her notepad. She had raised her phone early before most people registered what was happening, and she had kept it steady with the practiced calm of a woman who had spent 31 years managing classrooms full of unpredictable human beings. Her recording captured everything: the approach, the exchange about the bench, the arm grab, the shove into the doorframe, the spit, and in the 5 seconds after the spit, Jerome's face, looking down at the back of his hoodie, then slowly forward, with an expression that the internet would spend the next 72 hours attempting to caption and consistently failing to capture, because what was on his face was not captionable. It was the specific expression of a man who has just been handed exactly what he needed, and who knows it, and who is not going to say so. The audio on Beverly Odom's recording was extremely clear. Every word was audible. By 11:30 that morning, while Jerome was at Caldwell Falls General Hospital, having his wrists examined and the marks documented as part of a medical record his attorney had advised him to establish, the video was already moving. By 1 in the afternoon, the primary recording had been viewed 380,000 times. By 3, it was past 1 million. By 6 in the evening, the number had exceeded any meaningful tracking because it had reached the threshold where platform algorithms amplify without being asked, where national media picks it up independently, where the story enters the broader culture and acquires a momentum entirely its own. The local affiliates ran it at 5. The national networks had it by 10. By 11, Caldwell Falls Police Department was generating more online search traffic than the city had ever produced in its documented history. Mayor Diane Cartwright held her emergency press conference at 9:45 that evening. She was the specific version of herself that she brought to moments requiring directness over performance, stripped of the usual rhetorical scaffolding, dealing in facts. She confirmed Jerome Washington's appointment publicly 48 hours ahead of the scheduled announcement. She stated it as a fact, not as a response to the video, which was an important distinction. She was not announcing him because of what happened. She was confirming an appointment already made. The video was merely a clarification of why the appointment had been necessary in the first place. She said what had been captured on that recording was consistent with the patterns that had made the appointment necessary. She said the incoming chief would be reviewing those patterns immediately and thoroughly. She said anyone who believed the change in leadership would be cosmetic was invited to reconsider. She said all of this in 4 minutes. She took 3 questions. She left the podium. By 10 that night, a journalist named Sandra Keene at the Caldwell Falls Courier published the full internal affairs record for all 4 excessive force complaints filed against Derek Holt over 7 years. 3 closed without action. 1 closed with a written reprimand that could not be located in the physical file. All 4 complainants were black men. Keene ran the piece at 10:15 with the full documentation attached. Ray Sutter had watched the press conference from his apartment, alone, with a glass of water he had not touched. He had spent the afternoon in a specific kind of internal silence, not the silence of indecision. The silence of a man who has already decided something and is waiting for the necessary courage to arrive in sufficient quantity to act on it. He had been on the force for 22 months. He had come in with specific ideas about what it meant to serve the public. He had spent 22 months watching those ideas be tested by a culture operating on different premises. This morning had been the clearest test yet. He had failed it. By being present, by saying nothing, by getting in the car. He knew it. And he was the kind of person for whom knowing something like that was incompatible with continuing as though he did not. He picked up his phone at 11:40 that night. He called his personal attorney. He told her he wanted to provide a full voluntary statement to Jerome Washington's legal team. He told her he wanted to document everything. He told her he was not looking for leniency or consideration. He simply could not carry the weight of having been there and silent. His attorney told him to get some sleep. She would make the call at 8 in the morning. Sutter set his phone down. He sat in the quiet of his apartment for a long time. He thought about the moment in the lobby when Jerome's sealed envelope had fallen to the floor and Holt had kicked it aside. He thought about the moment in the booking room when Norma Dade's pen had slipped and no one had moved to retrieve it. He thought about Jerome's face in the transport vehicle watching the street through the rear window, cataloging everything, already thinking about Monday morning. He picked up the glass of water and finally drank it. Monday morning. Jerome Elias Washington walked into the Caldwell Falls Police Department through the front entrance. Chief of Police. In uniform, he walked through the lobby at his ordinary pace. Not ceremonially, not with performance. He walked the way a man walks into a building where he has work to do. He passed the bench near window 5. He noted it in his peripheral vision the way he noted everything, and he felt briefly and completely the presence of Calvin, not the grief of Calvin, not the absence of Calvin, his presence, his laugh, the specific quality of his attention in any room he entered, the way he had loved this city for 14 years and deserved to be loved back by it. Jerome felt this and let himself feel it and kept walking. His first act as chief was to send a formal written acknowledgement to Beverly Odom for her courage in documenting what she witnessed. His second was to authorize Sergeant Norma Dade's formal commendation for handling an extraordinary situation with integrity. His third was to open the personnel files of every officer in the department and begin reading them the way Norma Dade read everything. The department had a new chief, and the department was going to learn what that meant. The legal process moved with unusual speed given what had been documented. Ray Sutter's voluntary sworn statement delivered in full detail covering the lobby confrontation, the transport drive, and the booking intake was considered among the most comprehensive and credible witness accounts the Caldwell Falls County District Attorney's Office had processed in years. Sutter described every word, every action, every moment of his own failure to intervene. He did not minimize his participation. He did not frame himself as a helpless bystander. He said plainly that he was present and said nothing, and that his silence was a form of participation, and that he understood the weight of that. The DA's office accepted his full cooperation. The charges against Derek Holt were filed in Week 3, felony assault under color of law. The spit classified under statute as deliberate biological assault against a person in custody. False arrest without probable cause. Excessive force resulting in documented physical injury. Federal civil rights violation under Title 18. 3 counts of falsified incident reporting tied to the prior closed complaints. The prior complaints were in fact no longer closed. The investigation had revealed that Lieutenant Gary Moss's signature appeared on each cleared file. The documentation methods used to close them did not hold up under federal scrutiny. Moss was placed on administrative leave pending a separate federal civil rights investigation. Sergeant Crane received a formal written reprimand and mandatory retraining. She requested the retraining herself before it was formally assigned. This was noted in her file. The union representative who had cleared Holt's path through 4 prior complaints declined to comment for any subsequent reporting on the case. The department's internal culture, the one that had made all of this possible, was no longer invisible. It was documented. It was public. It was being read by people with federal authority and unlimited patience. The city of Caldwell Falls settled the full civil liability at $3.8 million. Not 1 cent from the general tax revenue. Not $1 from services or public programs. Every cent was recovered from the department's misconduct insurance reserve, a fund whose balance had been quietly inflated over 7 years by the very settlements that Holt's prior conduct had already necessitated. The money came from the machine that had protected him. That was not accidental. Jerome had made certain of it. The city council passed a new ordinance unanimously on a Tuesday evening in early spring. Mandatory body cameras for all officers without exception. All use-of-force footage made public within 72 hours of any incident. Civilian Review Board established with full subpoena power and independent legal counsel. Prohibition on any form of quota-based enforcement. Annual documented bias training with outcomes reported publicly. Not perfect, but real, structural, the kind of change that outlasts the people who made it necessary. Beverly Odom received a formal letter of commendation from Jerome's office, signed by the chief himself. She framed it. She hung it in her kitchen beside a photograph of her 31 years of classroom students. She told a reporter from the Courier that she had not thought about being brave when she raised her phone. She had simply thought that someone needed to remember exactly what happened, and that it was not going to be Officer Holt. 3 of the 5 other officers who had witnessed the lobby incident and said nothing during the confrontation came forward voluntarily during the federal investigation. Each cited Ray Sutter's example by name. Each received reduced disciplinary consequences in exchange for full cooperation. Sutter himself was assigned to the department's new ethics curriculum as a training officer. He taught the first module, which covered the individual obligation to refuse participation in institutional misconduct, regardless of professional cost, regardless of rank, regardless of how long a person has been on the force, or how much they believe they need their job. He taught it with the specific authority of someone who had lived the example before he understood the material. The morning of his first class, he stood at the front of the room and looked at the officers seated before him. Some older than him. Some who had been on the force far longer. He did not pretend that he had done the right thing in that lobby. He told them plainly that he had not. He told them what that felt like to carry. He told them what deciding to put it down felt like. He told them that the difference between what he chose eventually and what he had failed to choose in the moment was not courage. It was timing, and that both of those things were a choice. The room was very quiet. Then the class began. 6 months after the lobby, the Caldwell Falls Police Department civilian complaint rate for use of force was the lowest in the department's recorded history. The Community Trust Index, compiled quarterly through independent survey, was at its highest point since the metric was introduced in 1991. These were numbers. They mattered, but they were not the whole of it. The whole of it was a grandmother on a Tuesday afternoon who no longer crossed the street when a patrol car slowed beside her. The whole of it was a man in construction clothes who walked into the lobby on a Thursday morning to dispute an impound fee and was treated like a person. The whole of it was a classroom full of officers sitting in silence while a 24-month rookie told them about the morning he got it wrong. Derek Holt was serving year 1 of an 8-year federal sentence at a correctional facility in central Kentucky. He had no pension, no Hajj, no future in law enforcement in any jurisdiction for the remainder of his life. He swept floors for pennies an hour and had no more territory to patrol. Lieutenant Moss was serving his own federal sentence for obstruction of justice, 18 months with the paperwork trail from Holt's 4 closed complaints entered into evidence and made part of the permanent public record. He had not held public employment since his release and had not sought it. The Morehouse College hoodie was returned to Jerome after the trial concluded, and the evidence log was formally closed. His attorney's paralegal brought it to his office in a clear evidence bag. Jerome held it in both hands for a moment, feeling its familiar weight, the worn softness of 9 years of use, the fraying at the cuffs. The stain was still there, faint, above the Morehouse logo on the left side. Dry cleaning had reduced it but not eliminated it. He donated it to Caldwell Falls' newly established Police Accountability Documentation Center, housed in a ground-floor space in the Civic Center building 3 blocks from the police department. It was framed behind glass in the center's main display area, mounted beside a white placard bearing the date a brief factual account of the incident and 4 names. The 3 prior complainants whose cases had been closed without action, and Jerome Elias Washington. The center opened on a Saturday in early spring. Clear weather, sharp air. A small crowd gathered before the doors opened. Residents, advocates, journalists, a delegation from the city council, a minister from a church on 4th Street who opened the proceedings with a brief prayer about the uses of memory and the responsibilities of institutions to the people they serve. The 3 prior complainants arrived separately. They found each other near the entrance, stood together in the loose ease of people who have been through something significant and have arrived through that experience at a form of mutual recognition that does not require explanation. They went inside together. They found the placard. They stood in front of it and were quiet, each in his own way. One of them touched the glass with 2 fingers, did not speak. Another stood with his hands in his coat pockets, very still. The third read the placard twice, carefully, both times. Then he turned and looked at the room, at the people who had come, at the space that had been built, at the fact of it existing. His expression held grief and resolution in the particular proportion that comes from knowing something deeply wrong has been acknowledged at last, even though acknowledgement cannot undo what was wrong. It is not the same as undoing, but it is not nothing. It is in its own way everything that can actually be done. Jerome stood at the back of the room. He had declined the invitation to speak. There were people on the program who had been waiting longer for the chance to be heard in a setting like this one, and the order of speaking should reflect that. He stood near the back wall and watched. A woman nearby, a resident he did not know in a gray coat holding the program from the ceremony, glanced at him. Then at the placard, then back at him. "Thank you," she said quietly. Without performance. The way people say things when they mean them without wanting to make them larger than they are. Jerome looked at her. He said, "Calvin lived in this city for 14 years. He deserved better from it. We all did." She nodded. They stood together for a moment in the comfortable silence of 2 people looking at the same thing and understanding it without explanation. Then the ceremony continued around them, and Jerome stayed at the back and watched the 3 men at the placard and did not say anything more. The room was saying it without him. That was the point. That was in the end the whole point. If this story moved you, please subscribe to our channel where we share stories like this one every week. Derek Holt walked across a lobby toward a man sitting quietly on a bench and believed he knew exactly what he was walking toward. He had no idea. He never does. That specific blindness, that failure to see the person actually in front of you, is both how it starts and how it ends. Arrogance never fully accounts for the quality of attention in the people it is aimed at. The spit was meant to reduce a man, to remind him of the dimensions of his powerlessness in a building that had spent years deploying that powerlessness against people who had fewer institutional resources than Derek Holt. What it actually did was hand that man the exact evidence he needed in the exact setting, where it could do the most work in front of exactly the witnesses whose accounts would prove most decisive. Jerome Elias Washington keeps two things on his desk. One is a photograph of Calvin, not a formal portrait, a candid shot. Calvin laughing at something off camera with the full-body, completely unself-conscious laugh that was his most characteristic gift to any room he entered. The other is a photograph of the bench near window 5. Empty on an ordinary Tuesday morning. He has never explained the second photograph to anyone who has asked about it. He just says it reminds him of something important and gets back to work. Jerome Washington did not run a press conference on his first day. He did not call the department together for a speech about vision or values or the new direction. He did not post a memo to all staff about culture change or expectations or consequences. He arrived at 7:15 in the morning, before most of the day shift had clocked in, before the front desk staff had finished setting up the windows, before the coffee in the break room had finished brewing. He walked through the lobby. He walked through the hallways. He looked at bulletin boards and duty rosters and equipment logs. He sat in the dispatch center for 45 minutes and watched how calls were handled. He walked the parking lot. He stood in the booking room where Norma Dade had already arrived and was organizing intakes for the day. Norma looked up when he came in. "Morning, Chief," she said. Same flat, even tone. Same total professional composure. "Morning," Sergeant Jerome said. He looked around the room. He said, "What time do you usually arrive?" 6:40. She said it without hesitation. "How long has that been your habit?" 11 years. He nodded, filed it. Then he said, "I read your full personnel record yesterday." She looked at him over her reading glasses. "I also read the intake reports from the past 4 years. I noticed that your documentation of irregularities during the booking process has been consistently and accurately recorded, even in cases where that documentation was not acted upon by supervisors." She said nothing. "I want you to know I saw that," he said, "and I intend to act on it." Norma Dade looked at him for a long moment. Then she picked up her pen and went back to her intake forms. "Thank you, Chief," she said. That was the whole conversation. It was, Jerome thought, one of the better conversations he had in his first week. In the weeks that followed, Jerome moved through the department the way he had always moved through environments that required reconstruction. Methodically. Without announcement. With the patience of someone who understood that institutions do not change because a new person at the top declares them changed. Institutions change when the people inside them begin to believe through evidence and through consequence that the rules actually apply. He reviewed every open complaint file from the past 6 years. He found patterns. Not all of them surprised him. He had read the departmental review. He had done his research before accepting the appointment. But there is a difference between knowing a pattern exists and sitting with the individual files that prove it, reading the names of the people who filed those complaints, reading the outcomes, reading the language used in the memos that closed the cases, language that was careful and bureaucratic and designed to say nothing while appearing to say something. He sat with those files for 3 days. He made notes. On the 4th day, he called a meeting with every supervisor in the department. He did not give a speech. He did not use words about culture, or about values, or about the new direction. He placed a stack of files on the conference room table. He said, "I have read every one of these. I know what is in them. I know what should have happened and did not. Going forward, every complaint will be documented, reviewed, and responded to with a written outcome and a supervisor's signature. Every outcome will be reviewed by the civilian board, now empowered by city ordinance. If there is a complaint in this department that closes without a documented reason, I will want to know why. Not next month, that week. He looked around the room. If that is a problem for anyone in this room now, is the time to say so. Silence. Good, he said. Then he thanked them for their time and left. No performance, no drama. Just 4 minutes of clarity that left no room for ambiguity. The supervisors sat in that conference room for another 10 minutes after he left. Not because there was anything to discuss, but because some of them needed time to absorb the specific nature of what had just changed. The Caldwell Falls community took its time deciding what to make of Jerome Washington. Trust between a community and a police department once damaged does not repair itself because a new chief shows up and means well. Trust is rebuilt in transactions. Small ones, daily ones. Transactions where the outcome is different from what the person on the receiving end has been trained to expect. A man calls the non-emergency line about a noise complaint and someone actually calls him back. A woman comes into the lobby with a question about a report and is treated like a person with a question, not a problem to be managed. A teenager on Sycamore Avenue, who would have been stopped 3 separate times on his way home in previous years, is not stopped at all. These transactions accumulate. They do not make news. They are not measured in press conferences. They happen in the ordinary minutes of ordinary days, and they compound slowly the way any real change compounds. By the end of the first quarter, Jerome was meeting monthly with a community advisory group that included residents from every neighborhood in the city. Not a ceremonial body. A working group with direct lines to his office and the authority to flag complaints that were not being resolved. He attended the meetings himself. He listened more than he spoke. He wrote down names and specific situations and followed up on every one of them. One evening, a woman in her 60s named Dorothy Price came to a community meeting. She had lived on the east side of Caldwell Falls for 40 years. She had raised her children there. She had buried her husband there. She had filed 2 complaints with the department over the past decade, both of which had been closed without outcome. She was not interested in Jerome's good intentions. She had seen good intentions before. She came to the meeting with a list, specific incidents, specific addresses, specific officers. She laid the list on the table in front of Jerome. She said, "I have been telling this department about these things for a long time. You are new. But this department is not new to me. So before I decide what I think of you, I need you to tell me what happens to this list." Jerome picked up the list. He read it. He took notes. Then he looked at her and said, "Every item on this list will receive a written response from my office within 30 days. Every response will include whatever action was taken or the documented reason why no action was warranted. If you are not satisfied with the response, I want you to call me directly." He wrote his direct office number on a piece of paper and slid it across the table. She looked at the paper. She looked at him. She picked up the paper. She folded it. She put it in her coat pocket. She said, "All right, let us see." He did not expect more than that. He did not need more than that. He sent written responses to every item on Dorothy Price's list within 23 days. She called his office twice. Both calls were about follow-up. Both resulted in additional action. By the 6th month, Dorothy Price was at every community advisory meeting, not because she trusted the department, because she was watching it, and because watching it required showing up. Jerome thought that was the correct relationship. Ray Sutter taught his 5th ethics module on a Wednesday afternoon in the 3rd month. The curriculum had been developed in Jerome's first 30 days, drawing on research from 3 other departments that had undergone similar reconstruction and the work of an outside consultant who specialized in organizational accountability. Each module ran 90 minutes. Sutter's section was the first one, the one that covered what it looks like when an institution's internal culture asks individuals to participate in things they know are wrong, and what it costs to comply, and what it costs to refuse. He had taught it 4 times before this Wednesday. Each time he had gotten better at something specific, not at making it comfortable. He was not trying to make it comfortable, at making it true. Every time he stood in front of a room of officers and told the story of that Thursday morning, he told it the same way, without editing, without selecting the version of himself that looked better. He told them about standing in the lobby and watching Holt grab an older man's arm. He told them about getting in the transport vehicle. He told them about the silence in the passenger seat while Holt talked through the partition. He told them that the silence was a choice, that it had felt at the time like the absence of a choice, like something that was simply happening to him rather than something he was doing. He told them that was not accurate. Every silence is a choice. Every moment of standing still while something wrong is happening is a choice. The choice might be a hard one. It might have real professional cost. It might put something you care about at risk. But it is still a choice. And after the class in the hallway or the parking lot or at the front desk the next morning, officers would stop him, not always to say thank you, sometimes just to nod, to make eye contact in a way that communicated something they did not have words for. Once a 10-year veteran named Paulson, a woman who had been in the department through 3 prior chiefs and considered herself committed to nothing except competence, stopped him in the hallway on a Tuesday afternoon. She said, "I have a situation. Something I saw last month. I have been trying to figure out what to do with it." He said, "Tell me." She did. He helped her document it correctly. It went to the Civilian Review Board. The outcome was a formal written reprimand for a different officer and a required retraining that went into that officer's permanent file. Paulson told 2 colleagues about the process. One of them brought a different situation to Sutter the following week. That was how it worked. Not in announcements. Not in press conferences. In hallways. In individual decisions. In the slow and unglamorous accumulation of people deciding that doing the right thing was a real option available to them in this department. Because the evidence was mounting that it was. 6 months after the lobby, Jerome walked into the Accountability Documentation Center for its official opening. He had helped design the space. He had reviewed the display materials. He had approved every word on every placard. But walking into it as a visitor, as someone walking through a door and into a room that had been built because of something that happened to him on an ordinary Thursday morning, was different from designing it. He stood near the back. He watched people come in. He watched the 3 prior complainants find each other and go to the placard together. He watched Beverly Odom stand near the display of her recording, now mounted beside a brief account of the morning she had raised her phone with the steady hands of a person who had been paying attention. He watched Dorothy Price come in with 4 other women from her neighborhood. He watched them read everything, take their time, talk to each other quietly. He watched a young officer from the department, one of the new hires from the past quarter, walk in on his lunch break in his own time and stand in front of the display and read it carefully from beginning to end. He did not know this officer. He made a note to learn his name, and then the woman in the gray coat was beside him, a resident he did not know. Looking at the placard with the photograph of the hoodie and the 4 names on the white card beside it, she glanced at him, then at the placard, then back at him. "Thank you," she said. Simply, without performance. Jerome looked at her. He said, "Calvin lived in this city for 14 years. He deserved better from it. We all did." She nodded. They stood together in the quiet of the room while the ceremony continued around them. Jerome stayed at the back. He did not speak from the stage. He did not need to. The room was saying what needed to be said. That was the point. In the end, that was the whole point. There are mornings now in Caldwell Falls when a patrol car idles at a red light on Sycamore Avenue, and a kid on a bicycle rides past, and the officer raises one hand, and the kid raises one hand back, and neither of them thinks very much about it because it is simply a thing that happens. That is not nothing. That is not everything. But it is the thing you build toward. One transaction at a time. One decision at a time. One morning at a time. It starts with a Thursday morning that was supposed to be nobody's business. And it ends slowly with something that belongs to everyone. The box of Calvin's things sat on Jerome's kitchen table for 3 days after he brought it home. He was not avoiding it. He was not afraid of it. He was simply waiting for the right morning. The kind of morning that would not rush him. The kind of morning that had enough quiet in it to do the thing justice. That morning came on a Sunday. He made coffee. He sat down at the table. He opened the box. The coaching clipboard was on top. Calvin's handwriting covered every surface. Player names in 2 columns. Formations drawn in blue ballpoint. A note in the margin from what looked like a game the previous April. 2 words. "Good day." That was it. 2 words. In Calvin's handwriting. On a clipboard from a Little League game the April before he died. Jerome sat with that for a long time. He set the clipboard down carefully. He lifted out the Bible. Opened it. Calvin had underlined passages throughout, not the famous ones, the small ones, the ones about patience and steadfastness and continuing when the path was unclear. He set the Bible beside the clipboard. He unwrapped the tools from their shop rag. Good tools. Kept clean, kept organized. Calvin had always been particular about his tools. It was a thing their father had taught them both. A man's tools tell you who he is. Calvin's told you exactly. And then the photograph. Jerome picked it up. His own retirement ceremony in Atlanta. 7 years ago. Calvin had driven 11 hours from Caldwell Falls to be there. Had not told Jerome he was coming. Had simply appeared in the crowd at the back of the room, and Jerome had spotted him during the remarks and had lost the thread of his prepared speech for exactly 4 seconds, because Calvin was grinning so wide it was visible from the front of the room. The photograph captured the 2 of them afterward. Calvin still grinning. Jerome's hand on his shoulder. Jerome looked at the photograph for a long time. He said quietly to no one, "I got it back, Calvin." Then he set the photograph on top of the Bible, set the clipboard beside it. He sat with the box and its contents in the quiet of his kitchen until the coffee went cold. Then he washed his cup. He put the photograph on his desk at the office that Monday. The candid one. The one where Calvin was laughing at something off camera with his whole entire body. The other photograph, the empty bench near window 5, he added later. Both photographs. 2 reminders. One of what he was working for. One of where the work had come from. Beverly Odom came to the department's first community safety forum 6 weeks after the lobby incident. She had not been invited in any official capacity. She had simply seen the announcement in the Courier and showed up. She sat in the 3rd row with her notepad and her reading glasses on their chain. Jerome saw her when he came in. He crossed the room to where she was sitting. He said, "Ms. Odom." She looked up. "I want to thank you personally," he said. "What you did that morning required a clear head and real courage. And what you captured made it possible to do everything that came after." Beverly Odom looked at him over her glasses. She said, "I raised my phone because someone needed to remember what happened. I have been a school teacher for 31 years. I know what it looks like when a person in authority is treating someone as less than a person. I have been watching for it my whole career, and I know that if you do not document it, it disappears." She looked around the room. Is this forum actually going to do something? Or is it going to be a place where the community talks and the department nods? Jerome said, "I want it to do something. Whether it does depends partly on whether people like you keep showing up and saying exactly what you just said." Beverly Odom considered this. Then she opened her notepad. "All right," she said. "Let us get started then." She attended every subsequent forum. She became in time one of the most effective members of the civilian advisory group, not because she had expertise in policing, but because she had expertise in watching institutions and asking the questions that institutions prefer not to answer. Jerome considered her one of the more valuable people he worked with in his first year. He never told her this directly. He simply made sure her questions received direct answers. That was the form of respect she wanted. He understood that. There was a moment somewhere in the 4th month that Jerome remembered afterward as a turning point. Not a dramatic one, not a moment with witnesses. He was in the parking lot of the department at 6:45 in the morning, finishing the last of his coffee before going inside when a patrol officer came out the side entrance. Young woman. Knew enough that her uniform still looked stiff. She had the slightly preoccupied expression of someone finishing a shift and thinking about the drive home. She saw Jerome and stopped. "Good morning, Chief," she said. "Good morning." She started toward the parking lot, then turned back. She said, "I just wanted to say, I know it is not my place to comment on things that happened before I got here, but I want you to know that a lot of us who started recently, we came here because we heard someone was trying to actually change things. And that meant something. When we were deciding where to go." Jerome looked at her. He said, "What is your name?" "Reyes, sir. Elena Reyes, 6 months in." He nodded. "Officer Reyes. What you just said matters. And I want you to know it runs both ways. The department needs people who showed up because they want it to be better. Do not let anyone convince you that wanting that is naive." She nodded. She turned and walked to her car. Jerome stood in the parking lot for a moment after she left. He thought about the morning he had walked into this building in a worn hoodie and scuffed boots with a sealed envelope in his pocket. He thought about what that morning had cost, and what it had made possible. He thought about Calvin, about the coaching clipboard, about 2 words in blue ballpoint. "Good day." He finished his coffee. He went inside. He had work to do. The Accountability Documentation Center became, in the months after its opening, something none of its planners had entirely anticipated. It became a place people came to think. Not just advocates, not just journalists, not just the people whose stories were recorded on its walls. Officers came, sometimes in groups, sometimes alone on lunch breaks or before their shifts. Some came because they felt they should. Some came because they were curious. Some came because they had heard about it from a colleague and wanted to see it for themselves. And some came because they were working something out. Something about who they were in the uniform they wore. Something about the distance between the job they had imagined and the job they had encountered. Something about what it meant to wear a badge in a city that now had a record of what could go wrong when that badge was treated as a license rather than a responsibility. Jerome heard about these visits through Norma Dade, who heard about them through the front desk staff, who noticed when officers from the department showed up on their own time and spent 20 minutes in a small civic center room looking at a framed hoodie and a white placard. He did not draw attention to it. He did not announce it. He noted it and let it be what it was. Evidence. Small evidence. Quiet evidence. The kind that does not make news and does not need to. The kind that means something is actually changing. On a Friday afternoon in the 7th month, Jerome drove to the east side of the city. He parked near Sycamore Avenue. He sat in the car for a few minutes. Then he got out and walked to the Little League field where Calvin had coached for 11 years. The field was empty on this Friday afternoon. The grass had gone to winter brown. The bases were up for the season. The scoreboard at the far end had a season's worth of weather on it. Jerome walked to the dugout on the third base side. He stood in it. He looked at the field. He tried to picture Calvin here, on a Saturday morning in April, clipboard in hand, arguing good-naturedly with a 10-year-old about the correct way to hold a bat, making the whole dugout laugh at something before the first pitch. He could picture it. He had heard enough stories from people in this neighborhood who had known Calvin, from parents who had sat in those bleachers, from players who were now high school students and remembered Coach Calvin as the kind of adult who made you feel like you were capable of something. The neighborhood had known Calvin. The city had not. The department had not. The storage locker had held his clipboard and his Bible and his photograph, while the city that had been too busy managing him to see him had continued on without noticing what it had lost. Jerome stood in the dugout for a while. He was not grieving, or not only grieving, he was also marking something, making a note in the particular ledger he kept inside himself. Calvin had loved this city for 14 years, and this city was going to deserve that love. Not perfectly, not all at once, but deliberately and without stopping. He walked back to his car. He drove to the office. He had work to do. Jerome Elias Washington completed his first full year as Chief of Police of Caldwell Falls with the lowest civilian use of force complaint rate in the department's recorded history, and the highest community trust index since 1991. He keeps two things on his desk: a photograph of Calvin laughing, and a photograph of an empty bench on an ordinary Tuesday morning. He has never explained the second photograph to anyone who has asked. He just says it reminds him of something important, and gets back to work. Derek Holt is serving year 1 of an 8-year federal sentence. He has no pension, no badge, and no future in any law enforcement role for the rest of his life. The hoodie is in the accountability center framed behind glass. The stain is still there, faint above the Morehouse logo, reduced but not eliminated. The center is open 6 days a week. People come. Officers come. A woman in a gray coat stood there one afternoon and said thank you to a man standing at the back of the room. And he told her his brother had lived in this city for 14 years. And that was all that needed to be said. That specific blindness, that failure to see the person actually in front of you, is both how it starts and how it ends. Arrogance never fully accounts for the quality of attention in the people it is aimed at. Holt walked toward a man on a bench and believed he knew exactly what he was walking toward. He had no idea. He never does. If this story moved something in you, subscribe to our channel. We share stories like this one every week. There are things that do not appear in any official record. They do not appear in the federal indictment. They do not appear in the civil settlement documents. They do not appear in the city council minutes from the ordinance vote. They do not appear in the Courier's award-winning coverage of the case, which ran for 7 consecutive weeks and eventually earned Sandra Keene a state journalism prize. They do not appear anywhere because they are not the kinds of things that get written down. They live in the space between people, in the small adjustments that individuals make when the ground beneath them shifts. A dispatcher named Marcus Tolliver, 12 years with the department, had a habit of asking clarifying questions when certain kinds of calls came in from certain neighborhoods. Questions that slowed things down. Questions that, if you were being generous, reflected professional caution, and if you were being accurate, reflected something else. After Jerome's first month, Marcus Tolliver stopped asking those questions. He did not make an announcement about this. He did not write a memo. He simply stopped, because the nature of the authority above him had changed, and the nature of the documentation around him had changed, and the calculation he made every morning about what was expected of him had changed. That is not in any record, but it is real. A patrol officer named Denton, 22 years on the force, old enough to have worked under 3 previous chiefs, had a routine. When he made a stop on the east side of the city, he had a particular way of asking for identification, a particular tone, a particular pacing to the request that communicated something specific about the power dynamic of the encounter. It was not something he thought about. It had become habit over so many years that it was simply how he moved through those moments. After the forum, in the 3rd month after sitting in that room and listening to Dorothy Price lay a list of specific incidents on a table, and watching Jerome Washington write down every item after watching the follow-up responses appear in writing, within 23 days Denton started noticing his own tone. He had not been asked to notice it. No one had pointed it out to him. He simply started hearing himself differently. He made an adjustment, small, barely perceptible to anyone watching, but perceptible to the people on the receiving end of those stops. Because what changed was not the words. What changed was what the words communicated about the assumption behind them. That is not in any record either, but it is real. Jerome's 2nd year was harder than the first in certain ways. The first year had momentum. The clarity of a department responding to a documented crisis. The energy of new policies being written and implemented. The relatively uncomplicated narrative of a man wronged and a system being held accountable. The 2nd year was the part that does not make good television. It was the part where the policies needed to be enforced consistently, not just in high-visibility situations, but in the ordinary ones, the ones where no one was watching, the ones that were easy to let slide, because the cost of consistency was friction, and the benefit was invisible. It was the part where people who had initially supported the changes began to have concerns about the pace of them, or the scope of them, or the degree to which accountability was being applied to people they personally liked and trusted. It was the part where Jerome had to say no to people who expected yes, had to hold lines that were genuinely uncomfortable to hold, had to absorb criticism from people whose support he needed without letting that criticism alter the calculation he was making about what was right. He had done this before, in Atlanta, in his years as deputy superintendent. He knew how to move through the friction without letting it stop him. But knowing how to do something and doing it are different weights. He kept the photograph of Calvin on his desk. He kept the photograph of the empty bench. On the days that were hardest, he looked at one and then the other. He thought about a Thursday morning, about a sealed envelope, about a box of coaching clipboards and worn Bibles waiting in the dark. He thought about what it had cost to walk into that lobby as no one and what it had made possible. He thought about the woman in the gray coat, about 4 words said without performance, and he went back to work. 6 months, 12 months, 18 months. The numbers told one story. The people told a different one. The true story was somewhere between them. The complaint rate was down. The trust index was up. 3 officers had been disciplined for conduct that in a prior era would have been quietly managed away. 14 new officers had been hired through a revised screening process that emphasized different qualities than the previous one. The Civilian Review Board had met 11 times and issued 8 formal recommendations, 6 of which had been implemented in full. Those were the numbers. The people were Dorothy Price, still showing up at every forum, still asking the questions the department preferred not to answer, still folding Jerome's phone number in her coat pocket, even though she had memorized it 8 months ago. The people were Beverly Odom, still in the 3rd row with her notepad, still watching, still writing things down. The people were Elena Reyes, 14 months in now, who had received her first formal commendation for her handling of a domestic disturbance situation, in which she had de-escalated a situation that her training officer later told Jerome could easily have gone a different direction. The people were Ray Sutter teaching his module for the 12th time, getting better each time at making it true, rather than comfortable carrying the thing he had done and the thing he had chosen afterward, as 2 facts that lived side by side without canceling each other out. The people were Norma Dade arriving at 6:40 every morning paperwork, error rate still essentially 0 reading, everything documenting everything, the fixed point around which a great deal else rotated. And the people were the ones whose names were not on any placard, the ones whose complaints had been closed without action, the ones who had walked away from interactions with this department carrying something they had not walked in with. Some of them came to the center. Some of them did not. Some of them would never fully trust an institution whose employees had treated them the way they had been treated. That was also real. That also belonged in the record. Justice that comes late is not the same as justice that was there when it was needed. Acknowledgement is not undoing. Jerome knew this. He had always known this. He did not say it often because it was not the kind of thing that needed to be said. It was the kind of thing that needed to be held. He held it, and he kept working. On a Saturday morning in the spring of the 2nd year, Jerome drove to Sycamore Avenue again. The Little League season had started. The field was full. Kids in uniforms that were mostly too big or too small. Parents in folding chairs along the baseline. A coach at third base arguing good-naturedly with a 9-year-old about whether to swing at the outside pitch. Jerome parked across the street. He sat in the car and watched. He did not go on to the field. He was not there in any official capacity. He was simply there. He watched the game for about an hour. At one point, a kid hit a ball into the gap in left center and ran like his life depended on it. He made it to third base. The dugout erupted. The parents erupted. Even the coach on the other side made a sound that suggested he appreciated what he had just seen. Jerome smiled. He thought about Calvin on this same field, about the coaching clipboard with 2 words in the margin, "Good day." He thought about what 14 years of Saturday mornings here meant, about the kids who had grown up with Calvin as a fixture of this neighborhood, about the particular kind of presence that a person can be in a community. Quiet, steady, showing up. He thought about the storage locker, the 16 months, the impound fee on an expired registration tag. And then he thought about the ordinance, the civilian board, the body cameras, the forums, the phone number folded in Dorothy Price's coat pocket. He thought about Elena Reyes and her first commendation, about Ray Sutter and his 12th module, about Norma Dade arriving at 6:40 every morning and reading everything. He thought about one Thursday morning, one sealed envelope, one man sitting on a bench near window 5, and everything that had come from that morning because of what was handed to him. and because of what he chose to do with it. The game ended. The kids dispersed. Parents folded their chairs. A coach gathered the equipment. Jerome started the car. He had work to do. There is still work to do. There always is.